Welcome to Raising OKC Kids, Conversations with Metro Family in Oklahoma City. I'm Erin Page, and today I'm joined by Sarah Brown, Ginny Underwood, and Tom Farris to talk about opportunities to explore Native culture and art in Oklahoma, and why it's so important to consider not only the history of Indigenous people in our state, but also the vibrancy of Native people and culture in our communities today. Welcome. I'm so glad to have each of you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we dive into this conversation, I'd love to start by telling our listeners a bit more about each of you. We're really fortunate to have you guys with us today. Sarah is a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. She has a master's in library and information studies and works as a public librarian where she focuses on providing diverse and meaningful programs to the community, including a brand new Indigenous story time we'll hear more about coming up. Sarah's a mother of two, an avid reader, and a proud member of Matriarch, a local nonprofit that focuses on educating and empowering Indigenous women. She enjoys learning about traditional Choctaw ways and works to pass them on to her children. Ginny is Marketing and Communications Manager for First Americans Museum, scheduled to open in Oklahoma City in September, and a member of the Comanche Nation of Oklahoma. She has more than 20 years experience helping nonprofit organizations at the intersection of faith, social justice, and bettering the human condition to develop and implement strategic communications plans. She's helped organizations like the Indian Law Resource Center and the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference of the United Methodist Church raise the visibility of their work and critical issues impacting Indigenous communities, resulting in policy change, new partnerships, and increased funding. Tom has been immersed in American Indian art his entire life. The child of passionate collectors, Farris spent a good deal of his formative years in various museums, galleries, and artists' homes. Having such intimate contact with the genre, Tom found inspiration for his own growing artistic aptitude. A member of the Cherokee Nation and Otoe Missouri tribe, he draws from his culture and lifelong influence of American Indian art to create his works. He's manager of Exhibit C Gallery and Gifts, has exhibited at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. and New York City, and received awards from a number of nationally acclaimed art shows. Again, I'm so happy to have you guys here today. And this conversation was kind of inspired by an article in Metro Family's most recent issue called Teaching Beyond the Land Run, that focuses on why the longtime tradition of holding land run reenactments in our schools can be so harmful to Native kids and families, as well as ideas from local experts about alternative opportunities to teach Oklahoma history in a way that centers the Indigenous experience. So to get us started, along those lines, I want to ask each of you to share whether you have memories of those kinds of land run reenactments as a child and how your families handled that. And then why it's so important that both Native and non-Native children have the opportunity to learn our state's history in a way that includes and centers the Indigenous perspective. Sarah, will you start us off?
Sure. So I definitely remember doing land run reenactments whenever I was a kid. And I can never remember there ever even being a mention of natives, not in passing, not any specific tribes. It was always just centered around this idea that this was all just empty land that was up for grabs, and it was such a great thing. And we would go on the outside, and we'd all rush around, and like we'd learn how to square dance for like weeks in PE beforehand. And it really, at the time, like my parents, my dad is white and my mom is the one that's Native, but she's never been connected to culture, so it didn't really matter to her. And it took me many years before I ever learned the history, and it was really just because I did all the learning and I was the one that connected with people so I could figure out what my real history is. So it's just so important because it takes a whole chunk out of who you are if you're not learning about these things. And it can really kind of like hit your identity a little bit, especially if you're not growing up really traditional, or if you're an urban native where you're not close to your tribe. My tribe is 3.5 hours away in Southeast Oklahoma. So I've made sure that it's not happening anymore for my kids. I I am the parent that went to Indian education, was like, hey, guess what's still happening in these schools around here? And now it doesn't happen anymore, which I'm really proud of myself for. But it's it's just so important to have that full understanding of what happened and how it happened, and that there were good guys and then there were bad guys, and then there was people that didn't know any better too, and just understanding all of it. It's just so important.
I love that, Sarah. I love hearing about your advocacy. And I think it's so important to understand that even for people who didn't grow up traditionally, that you still have an opportunity to reclaim that part of your history and heritage. Ginny, what about you?
Well, back in my day, no, I'm joking. I mean, I grew up here in Oklahoma, attending elementary schools in Norman, and we did land run reenactments every year. And I had a father working in Indian education his whole career, and so well, all the other kids got to dress up like the pilgrim, like with the bonnets and the dresses. We always had to dress up as Indians. With our traditional regalia on and go to school that way. And it created an interesting, I was proud of who I was, as a Native person, Indigenous person. But it also created, as a kid, it creates this doubt, this level of, why am I different? Why am I separate? So it's not just the act of the land run experience itself, but representation matters, authenticity matters. And when you are celebrating only half of the story, you're missing a lot. And so for the other Native kids and Indigenous kids, we just kind of, had to just get through the experience. But it definitely impacted us in a certain way. Why do I have to go as an Indian? Why can't I be like everybody else? You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that came into play with that, and it still happens today. I still see the fun of staking out land claims and those kinds of things, but I think we have to be authentic in the way that we represent history. And even though it seems like it's happened so long ago, that representation matters, and it's still impactful to our Indigenous students today, or Indigenous kids today. And I think that's where we got to start, pausing, like Sarah said, and looking at why are we doing this, and what impact are we having, and are we being authentic and telling the whole story. So that's part of what First Americans Museum's goal is to add an authentic perspective to history, that we've all learned, but also giving it a perspective that hasn't been seen before, and that matters. Representation, authenticity matters.
Absolutely. And it matters so much to our kids in their formative years, especially being able to see people who look like them, who share their culture and traditions, and really see that as something to be really proud of, is so important. Tom, what about you?
So I was born in Oklahoma, but didn't live in Oklahoma as a child. But I definitely remember those situations in school where it came time to learn about Indians, and everybody kind of turns around and you're the one Indian kid in class. It's like, oh, well, I guess now I get to be expert. But I was very fortunate that I have very culturally aware, very activist parents, and so it was always drilled in my head from an early age to be proud of your culture and speak up on your culture. And I I was really emboldened as a kid to correct my teachers. And so when it came time for my kids to go through that, I really was involved more just privately with the teachers, just to kind of say, hey, can we talk about what you're going to be doing for this? And I'm willing to give you some information or some contact with some people that might be able to give you a better, clearer picture. Because I think the games in the way that it's portrayed really kind of trivializes the trauma of the event. You know, if you grow up with it, just like, oh, it's like playing Red Rover, basically. I mean, that doesn't really kind of drive home what actually happened in history. And I think that's uh, the portion of history that you learn about Native people in public education is lacking severely. I mean, basically, you learn about the Trail of Tears, and that's about it. And maybe the Land Run, but that's really not even, we're not even part of that story. So when we're so underrepresented to begin with, to have us be completely left out of a major portion of Oklahoma history is frustrating. And so that's really why I worked really closely with my children's teachers to kind of give a little bit more accurate or full story of the history of the state.
That's such a great idea to have those conversations with our kids' teachers to hopefully empower the teachers and empower our kids to share who they are and their culture and traditions proudly in the classroom. I think becoming more of a normal thing in our kids' classes today, and I hope that continues. But it's certainly because of parents like you who are willing to share that information and connect schools and teachers with those resources. Sarah, I think you said earlier, you know, when we know better, we do better, and I hope that that's kind of the momentum that we're feeling, and that will continue. So in addition to thinking about the way we teach history to our kids, it's also important to convey this message that Native culture, people, traditions are not just from the past, but have vibrant modern applications and are really flourishing in our communities and the people around us. So we also wanted to talk today about some of the fun and exciting ways that families can experience and understand the variety of Native cultures. Sarah, I'd love to start with you here. You've launched Indigenous Storytime through the Metropolitan Library System. This is a virtual opportunity primarily for young kids, but it's also been great for my kids who are ages 5 to 9. They get to hear books and stories by Indigenous authors and illustrators read by Indigenous community members. So what was your inspiration to launch this program, and what do you hope kids and the adults who are watching with them gain from the experience?
So whenever I launched it, I was creating it, I was really going with the idea of the role that aunties play in Native culture, and just how I wanted to share that feeling with people. The feeling that like my kids get every time that they're around all their aunties and they're getting loved on and they're learning from them all the time. So that's kind of what I started it out with. It originally was going to be called Auntie Story Time, but then I expanded it because I wanted to make sure that I was including as many different Indigenous cultures as I could. So it really came from that, and then just trying to find a way that Native kids could see that representation, and also for non-Native kids to have that interaction with our different cultures so that they realize that we're still here, that we are an active living culture, that we're not centered in, 1800s black and white pictures. That, it's your friend down the street, it's, your cousin, it's all this kind of stuff. So that was really where it came from. And I've been really excited about how many people I've gotten that can, really enjoy it and learn and use it as teaching moments. And then how many of my friends and family and other people have come in and said, that is so cool that, I was able to hear a story from my tribe that I didn't even know that that was there. Or I didn't realize that the library had Indigenous stories. Or, I never heard about that oral tradition and that kind of stuff. So I've been really happy with how it's worked out.
It's a really incredible program, and it's first Tuesday of the month, right? And you can also access previous Indigenous Storytime videos as well. So highly encourage all of our listeners to go check that out. So Tom, for you as both an artist and a curator, you have explored so many types of art, but always with an intent upon featuring Native history and culture. And as we heard in your bio, this is really a lifelong dedication for you. How are you helping create a viable market for Native artists in Oklahoma? And why is this so important, both for the artists and for the community to have the opportunity to view and purchase those works?
Well, so everything I've really done professionally in the business side of Native art has always been about developing the market for Native art here in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, despite having such a huge concentration of Native artists, it's really kind of a difficult market to sell work here. So, I've worked for small museums, I've had my own gallery, and I currently run another gallery. And in those times, I've always focused on artists that are doing very, it's a terminology that is not always liked, but contemporary work, in that, they're not doing what most people would consider typical Native art. And that's really an effort to show that we're a contemporary culture. So much that is missing from public education is the contemporary picture of Native people. We're always portrayed in a historical context. And so it's hard to kind of, for kids to wrap their head around. It's like, oh, these people existed in the past, and they're never really referenced in the contemporary or even future. So I love those ideas of Native futurisms, Native pop art, really kind of Native culture encroaching on the dominant culture. And I think it's important for Native artists and the general public to see that, just because this is, through those pieces of artwork, that's how Natives are expressing how they interact with a dominant culture. It shows, the things that they identify with. Star Wars is a really great example. So many Native artists identify with Star Wars. And if you really think about it, like, it's a group of rebels that are fighting this imperial force that is coming to wipe them out of existence. I mean, it really is kind of a Native story. So when you see things that Native people identify with, and that's reflected in their artwork, that shows those commonalities between Native people and general public. And those are the places where I think a lot of bridges can be built.
Absolutely. I love that perspective, Tom. Thank you. Ginny, you and your team have recently moved into the highly anticipated First Americans Museum space in preparation for opening this September. We're also excited. And I love that your entire curatorial team is Native, which is extremely unique, gives such valued perspective, and is helping create a really authentic experience as you get ready to welcome visitors. So will you share with us how this concept of experiencing and understanding both Native history and modern day tradition and art will be a cornerstone for the new museum, and what families can look forward to?
Yeah, I'm happy to share with you all. You're actually kind of getting a sneak peek behind me. This is a picture looking down from the mezzanine level of the beautiful colors that in our exhibition wing that are going to be installed over the summer. But I wanted to reference something that Tom had said, talking about this huge information gap that exists and people understanding contemporary Native peoples. I think there was a research study that was done that said that most what Americans know about Native American people, they learn through K through 12, but a lot of that knowledge ends in the 1920s. So from the 1920s to today, there's a huge information gap. And a lot of times that narrative has been filled in by non-Native people. A lot of times it's Hollywood stories, romanticism of what our cultures are. And so one of the most fantastic things about the First Americans Museum is, like you said, we have an all-Native curatorial team, and we're able to share about Native culture, traditions, and practices from that perspective. So we're very excited to be able to work with the 39 tribes of Oklahoma today who have been who will be represented within and throughout First Americans Museum. The museum includes an origins theater. We kind of start you off with the origin stories of our tribes in Oklahoma today. We move you through a historic timeline where you can see Indian removal, challenges our tribal people have faced, but then there's also value circles within that timeline where you can hear from our tribal people and their perspective. So our resiliency, you know what I mean? It is a tragic story, but then there's also a lot of wonderful things that happen along the way, the strength of our people, the resilience of our people, how we were able to maintain our culture and identities throughout the year. So as you move through the timeline, you will also hear our value circles and the stories from our folks. And then we also include, we take you through the timeline, and then we kind of move you into today and what contemporary Indigenous peoples look like today, and how we interact with culture, as Tom was alluding to, or through storytelling. How we have grown through the historic periods and then moved into today. And a lot of our cultures are warrior societies. So we have a nice veterans memorial, warriors memorial for people to interact with. And one of the coolest things about that exhibition piece is that it has a living database where we've worked with tribal leaders to represent, to get veteran names from each tribe so that people can go in and look up veterans from their own tribes or the tribes in Oklahoma today. And that's going to be something that will continue to develop and add to it. So it'll be kind of this living directory of Native veterans. We have a section of the museum that looks at games because, our tribes are full of different kinds of Indigenous games. So there's just so much to look at, to understand, to feel. You have a heavy history, which is just part of the story, but then there's also a level of resiliency and hope, and then looking to who we are today, and then also moving forward. I mean, it's a living history, and it's something that that will continue to grow, and we'll add to it. And then in 2022, we will be opening our, or maybe possibly into 2023, our Children's Discovery Center, which is a 3D pop-up world. And it has these fantastic animal guides that will guide you through the experience, but it's a 2-level experience where kids and family members can climb through different levels and then also interact. It doesn't matter what generation, it's open for everybody. It has something for everybody, whether you're a teenager or you're a grandparent or you're a parent or a kid. You'll be able to find something to experience in the Family Discovery Center. So we're really excited about that as well. But first we got to open the doors, right? So we're looking towards our grand opening September 18th and 19th of this year. And after, I believe this has been a 20+ year project, and to finally see it come to fruition is just so exciting. And it is a world-class destination, and we're super excited to share it with people of Oklahoma City and the world, for sure.
And we are so fortunate to have this museum here in our city. I am so excited, and I know Metro Family will be sharing more information from you all as we get closer to that opening. We cannot wait. So you guys have shared some great ideas already, but I'd love to hear from each of you if you have other favorite places or events in Oklahoma where families can experience Native culture or art. Tom, what would you suggest for families?
Oh, wow. I'll try to take them all up. So I will say the tribes have done an amazing job of creating some really beautiful and educational locations, cultural centers. The Chickasaws have an amazing cultural center. The Cherokees have Cherokee Heritage Center. That's great, and you can really interact. They have cultural performers or teachers, and they teach you traditional crafts, and you really get a more in-depth or hands-on idea of Native culture in those locations. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention art galleries. There aren't very many, surprisingly, in Oklahoma for Native artists, but I would definitely say Exhibit C is a great place. What we do is so much education, just because we can definitely see the need for a First Americans Museum, because we have people come through all the time and they just want to see Native culture. And we're one of the few locations in Oklahoma City where that's possible right now. And so we're very excited. And so we do our little form of informal education. We answer people's questions and show them what Native culture is today. But the bigger picture, I think, is going to be great when First Americas Museum open. We're all very excited for that.
For sure. Great ideas, Tom. Thank you. Sarah, what about you?
So there's always, local powwows, obviously not right now. But, after we are able to get back to some sort of normal, I'm sure powwows are going to start popping back up. So there's always those opportunities. And, depending on the powwow, I mean, there's always opportunities for people that are non-Indigenous to go to those. Like Tom was saying, the cultural centers that are around are amazing. I can't wait for FAM. I got to go on a virtual walkthrough of it, and it was amazing. Besides that, there's also the Culture Hub that is run by We the People. They've had different vendor fairs there. They have Indigenous groups that come in and they'll do presentations, stuff like that. So that's a really great place to learn. And I know even Gilcrease up in, I think, Tulsa, that one has had a lot of my matriarch sisters' art has been displayed there. There's the Red Earth Museum. That one's a little bit more traditional kind of stuff that you'd see at, the Red Earth Festival. But there are still those opportunities too that are out there.
Those are great suggestions, Sarah. Thank you. Ginny, as we're waiting for FAM to open, where can we go in the meantime?
Well, those are good questions. I mean, I echo what they both have already shared, as well as, I do think festivals will be coming back. A lot of our tribes hold different festivals throughout the year, which are always a great time to see demonstrations as well as eat Indigenous food. And I think most of the tribes will list that kind of details on their social media or their website. So in addition to what has already been said, I would say keep an eye out for those festivals. I think once the vaccinations and COVID kind of slows down, that all of those things will be coming back, and it'll be a great time once again for everybody.
Absolutely. And you are so right that food is always a great way to experience any culture, and kids can typically get on board with that pretty easily. So we're living in these very weird times right now, chaotic and often divisive. But what are some of the ways that you all have seen storytelling, art, or cultural experiences bring people together or encourage questions and dialogue, and maybe even promote healing? Sarah, will you start?
Sure. So for me personally, I always feel the best whenever I'm surrounded by my culture, or whenever I'm surrounded by, my Indigenous sisters, that matriarch. And I know that it can sometimes be a toxic place, but I've seen a lot of different places or spaces opening up online and virtually, starting to lead these conversations and tell these stories, and allowing people that don't know about them to interact and ask questions and have good discussions. Of course, there's always going to be the bad parts of that, but I feel like a lot of the things that keep people in the dark about what's going on, or kind of make it to where people can't understand each other, is that they just don't have the opportunity to ask some of the questions, or they don't know who they can ask the questions to, who are safe people that are willing to educate, who have that emotional bandwidth to be able to do that at the time. And I think having some of these virtual spaces open up is allowing the people to have questions to meet with the people that are willing to answer and educate, so that they can have those conversations. And also just kind of bringing to light some of our history that people aren't exposed to, aren't being taught. We kind of saw it with not so much Indigenous side, but with the Tulsa race massacre. Now we know a lot more about it, and more people are being exposed to that information that had no idea. So I see that happening a lot with Indigenous communities too.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. Tom, you talked earlier about art being a bridge. How have you seen that working, especially over the last year?
Uh, well, I feel like a lot of contemporary Native art um, is kind of serving as stand-in education, and a lot of what I do is that way. Like I said, I try to utilize pop iconography, and pair that with Native culture in a way to let people identify with that piece, with whatever they recognize in it, and then use that to kind of add in a little Native culture and story to that. And it's kind of a Trojan horse way to look at it. You kind of sneak in the education with something pretty or something that's engaging. And I feel like that's probably the most effective way to really bridge those gaps, because it's something that the person wants to engage with anyway, and you're not kind of berating them or yelling at them. You're just like, hey, so you like this? Well, let me tell you how that relates to Native people. And it's incidental learning, I think, is probably better than when you're trying to, really drill something into someone's head. I think when they're more open and receptive that way.
That's such a great point. Jenny, what would you add?
Well, I think the bridge building, I mean, storytelling, art, all those things are important in terms of bridge building for sure. And being able to create spaces where people can have dialogue and ask questions. And we're such a small percentage of the overall population in this country that we need advocates, we need partners, we need allies to help tell our story, be supportive of our causes, create awareness on important issues that face Indian country. So, I mean, these are small arenas that we can begin to have those conversations that don't exist anywhere else. And so I think that's the value of these things and the opportunities that are ahead of us to become partners and to really help create a better environment for all of us.
Such a great point, Jenny. Thank you. As we close out our conversation today, I'd love to hear from you all how you instill pride in your Native culture or traditions in your children or children in your lives. And how does that help give you hope for how this next generation will carry on that heritage? Jenny, will you start?
Yeah, I have three daughters, and allowing them to be a part and to participate in traditional events and in our culture and our tribes is one way that we instill that. They are all artists. And so it's supporting their efforts to do research or to delve into the community to find direction for their art subjects is always fun. But really it's that community perspective, allowing them to be around our communities, to be able to engage, whether it's through art, through dance, or through ceremony, allowing them to participate at that level and getting to know our elders. And that's, to me, you connect that way, and there's no stopping it. You know what I mean? The value, the love that's given to them, that they receive and that they're able to give out, is a beautiful thing.
I love that. That's so wonderful. Tom, what about you?
Well, I mean, I work directly with my kids, just because that was the blueprint that I had from my parents, just really making sure that they know their culture and that they're prepared with that information that they're not going to get anywhere else. But I think one of the things that gives me most hope is that seeing tribes now able to tell their own story rather than have it being dictated to them by academics or museums. We're finally able to kind of say, okay, well, this was our experience. And so with that, agency to tell our own story, that gives us a lot of identity.
That's such a great point, and that's so important. Sarah, what about you?
So I do kind of what Tom was talking about doing. I make sure that I know what my kids are being taught in school. I talk with their teachers, offer resources. If it's something that they can't, get around because of, school standards, then, I make sure I re-educate them at home. I try to decolonize as much as I can our thinking and language, and teach them and have them learn and be around like Indigenous people that are doing great things, that are being active, that are, that they can really relate to and see how vibrant our culture really is and how vibrant other cultures within Native tribes really are.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your time today, for your valuable perspective, and all the ways you're each making such a positive impact on our community and the families in our community. Thanks everyone for listening. Join us next time on Raising OKC Kids.